Good morning, everyone. I'm Ajahn Cunda, and welcome to the Hermitage Dhamma. Hope everyone is well, enjoying your practice, gaining fruit from your practice. When times are difficult, continuing on and seeing those as the bumps or the valleys, very normal in what it is we do when we practice the Buddha Dhamma. Things are winding down here at the Hermitage, and preparing for, most of you know, we're preparing for Lumpur Pasno and Ajahn Cunda and Anagargatai to arrive. And then the two monks who are here living with me are about to depart just about at the same time. And I'll stay on for about another week and a half after that. So we'll see about the next live stream. It will occur, but I'm not sure if I'll be here or if Lumpur will be here in my place, or we'll both be here testing out. Or perhaps Ajahn Cunda as well. See if I can get them into an interview. As I've mentioned in several of the live streams, we've been wrapping up things together here, our energy has shifted quite a bit in the monastery, and we're not as engaged in our hermit's lifestyle. We're doing a lot of work together to put in a fair amount of good quality work so that we give Ajahn Lumpur Pasno and Ajahn Cunda a monastery that's in good shape. And it already has been, but there were some older things we've been dealing with that I'm sure if you've tuned in before, you've already heard about quite a bit. But it was really nice yesterday because yes, Shelley will take questions today after I finish speaking for a little bit. So it was really nice to work together, and also just like we kind of finished the deck for Lumpur Pasno, or I should say refinished it, and got it to not my perfectionist standards, but good enough, and was really happy that it restored so well. And then the walking path as well. We had put a lot of time into power washing it, sanding it, and now staining it. And it's interesting, as one might imagine, in work situations, they're not, even with somebody who's like leading it up or whatever, it's not always easy. We're having to manage our particular perceptions and sort of, especially our views, what we think one should do, needing to make a decision and making certain decisions, and those decisions can't always be popular with people, with everyone. So we go back to that adage about not being able to please all of the people all of the time. And so it was quite, it's enjoyable to work with everyone, with the other two monks, and I think we all enjoyed it. But there were other times where it was difficult because that's just how it is, I think, in a work situation when differences of opinion arise. And it's very natural. It's not like there was no real problems in that, but we struggle with that tendency to have my opinion met, or oftentimes, though, as I've thought about it, it's just hearing people, just listening to people, considering what they say, and in our tradition, we do take up leadership roles, so we do need to make certain decisions and certain calls. And so it's been interesting in my life to just continue to bring that up and work with it, as I've mentioned several times before, and just see how much I'm grasping around it, grasping around, really a self, really having a sense of who's right, or whether I should be listened to more, and I would say inversely, the amount of times that I feel like that I am not being listened to, I have to question myself: am I listening? Am I actually caring for the other person, not seeing them just as an object to accomplish a goal, but rather like as a real human being who I'm listening to, and really considering, not just kind of nodding my head. We're still going to do what I want to do. So that's an important aspect of the monastic life, something that we're trained in. It's not like a military situation that we have here with people just obeying commands and yes, sir. It doesn't work like that. However, we do see it working a little bit more in that, with that, when you have a very, very senior monk. And I found it interesting because the more friendly and friendship I have with some of the monks who I live with, sometimes, I've been working with that around how too much informality can actually lead to a sense of, oh, we're friends, I can tell you whatever I want, or that kind of relationship around respect can sometimes diminish slightly due to that. And sometimes I think, well, maybe that's something that others need to work on, but it's important to imbibe that sense of friendship. And that's what I think is so important when we relate to others. And sometimes we can get caught up in that feeling of like, oh, I'm not being respected here, or, but I often think, well, how would I rather have it that there's possibly an artificial deference or a sense of going along with something, even though maybe resentment might rise, or is there a friendliness where people think that they can actually say how they feel about something? And definitely I incline towards the latter, towards being open-hearted and kind, and then, but also looking at my own self, like why, my own behavior and motives, and why certain things arise. So yesterday it was really nice. One of the other monks and I were just informally having tea together, and we ended up processing a fair amount of just how living together has been, and some of the mistakes we've made with our speech. And because there was so much friendship there, and I've known this monk for a long time now, a couple of years. There was a real sense of being able to receive feedback in a positive way, because of that mutual friendship that's there. And it really was, it really is. I think that when one opens one's heart to how another person feels and explains how they feel, and then one does the same for that other person, there can be a real opening to oh, I understand now, okay. Whereas without that kind of openness and feedback, it's just not possible to really gain as much as we can from our own understanding without the benefit of others. So this is why the Buddha talks about, one of the reasons the Buddha talks about the Sangha being the whole of the holy life, rather than when Ananda suggested it was half of the holy life. He said, oh, don't say that so, Ananda, it's the whole of the holy life. So that's a sense that we don't do this alone. We have others, we have teachers, we have Kalyanamitta, we have spiritual friendship. And it's very important to rely on that and open our hearts to those of us who are mutually on the same path, and also to people who are not, and to value what they say to us, to value what all people have to say about our behavior, or how it is we do things, or how something that we just might not understand was innocently communicated or not, has different implications that we might not understand. And I see that as, the social realm, and dealing with the social realm, as I talk about quite a bit. This really informs my practice to a huge degree. So I can be, sitting in meditation and feeling quite calm, and as I I can think like, oh, well, that was such a good meditation, and I can take credit for that, and I can gain peace and a real sense that, oh, right, this is what the Buddha's teachings are about, that this peace is possible. But then I can within minutes, get up, and then all of a sudden an argument could occur, or some difficulty could occur with somebody else, and I might, think that the meditation is the only place that I can be peaceful. So, as I've mentioned before, there's a spiritual bypassing that can occur. You say, well, I'll just meditate my way through this, but I won't actually deal with my behavior, or be open to feedback. So it's the two go hand in hand, because I find that the more that we pay attention to our social interactions, the better the meditation gets. And usually that's true the other way around, but not necessarily. The better the meditation gets, the better our social experience can get, because again, we can spiritually bypass that. We can sort of bypass the ground of our social relations. So I think it's very important to pay attention to how we interact with others, and that's really what monks and nuns do a lot of when they're living together in monasteries. And that's also the danger from doing the opposite, when one spends so much time alone. It's a rare practitioner who's able to really benefit from being alone all the time. And there's a sutta where the Buddha criticizes another a monk, because he talks about, I think it's more, the one I'm referring to is more in, actually, about silence. This monk is silent all the time, so he's silent. And so in that case, actually, we're talking about speech. And so he actually criticizes this monk who just says he maintains silence all the time. And in that example, different than how I was moving in terms of solitude, there's an encouragement towards, like, right speech is actually speech. It doesn't mean right silence. So we do need to use speech, and we need to use it in a good way. And staying silent all the time is often just a way of, again, bypassing. We're just sort of refusing to get involved with others, and then we're not learning how to actually use speech. And silence can really affect others in a negative way sometimes. But in terms of solitude, I remember one of my teachers had mentioned that, if you have too much solitude in one's practice, and he was referring to monks in this case, he said that a monk who spends a lot of time alone, like doing tudong, for example, loses the skill of living in community, which is really interesting to think about. That we can actually, like losing the skill of using a language, or losing the skill of a profession that we have. If we're not doing it, then we forget. And he particularly mentioned that one can become incapable of living in community. And I think that can often be true. that the more solitude one has doesn't mean the better one's practice is. It just means we might experience a lot more peace, but we can also be avoiding the perturbance of other people. So I think that one of the ways that we can understand our meditative life, our life in sort of the realm that the Buddha talks about with sort of samadhi, concentration, mindfulness, right effort, these realms of our formal practice that we also use during our informal times in life. But those realms are very much informed with how we relate to other people. And that's why so much of the Buddha's Eightfold Path has to do with that. Do we have engage in a right livelihood? Or how is our moral conduct? How do we affect other people? And how does that affect us when we are morally upright? Our speech, how well do we guard our speech? Do we refrain from lying? Or even telling a joke for a lie for the sake of a joke or something like that, because we think, oh, it's a white lie, I'm not really trying to deceive anyone. And immediately there's the unveiling of the truth. So, but that's a problem, and that's one of the things that that one can run into trouble with. So that's a habit. For example, for myself, I know I've often had to need to break is humor is much more superior when it doesn't involve sort of a white lie to present the joke, to say something funny, even though you have no interest in actually misleading anyone beyond that. What it can lead to is a question when someone says, "Oh, is that really? I'm not sure if he's serious or not," and then people don't trust you. So, and that again has negative consequences in our practice. It comes back to us. So I think that's a very important element in our our lives as practitioners. How we relate to others and how that is really informing our formal. Our not our formal, but our suffering. How much stress do we feel? How much are we able to let go of? How can we develop, as the Buddha is talking about, this right view? And it takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of patience just to genuinely work with that and work with others. And of course, we need to be able to make mistakes. And we will have challenges along the way, but the benefit of this kind of feedback and this friendship that we can have in the holy life, in our spiritual life with our Kalyanamitta is so important, and I think it shouldn't be underrated. So I would suggest also asking people sometimes for feedback and genuinely being willing to hear them, because sometimes we'll ask for feedback and we might slightly want the person to think, well, maybe they'll just tell me what a great person I am. But if we're genuinely asking for feedback, we want something that we can reflect on and improve on. And it's hard. It's hard to do that because it can touch that very sensitive place in us that thinks that if somebody tells me something that's sort of wrong, that goes to myself, right? It's wrong about me fundamentally. It goes to this core of who and what we think we are. And that's where the jig is up. That's where we need to kind of look and be like, okay, this is some way that I'm creating this phenomena inside of me, in my mind, that when somebody tells me something about myself that could help me, it means that something's wrong with me fundamentally. And since I think that's where we get to really look at this sense of self, we have to actually examine how I'm holding my experience and dealing with someone giving me feedback. And we have to deal with it sometimes in adverse situations where it's not that friendly and it can be caustic what's said to us. But one of the reflections we're taught as monastics is to really kind of question, like, well, it wasn't said so nicely. It was actually very painful to hear. But was that person right in any way? Did they point to some truth that I'm not understanding? So, I think these are some elements I've been reflecting on. As most of you can see, that I can, or perhaps can see, that I use a lot of my daily life practice to inform what I talk about. A lot of my meditative practice is very useful to inform, how it is I speak about my understanding of the Buddha Dhamma. But I do find that the social realm really highlights a lot of the dukkha that can occur, even if it's subtle. So I try to see that, and then I also see that a lot of these same problems that occur when relating to others is just similarly how I relate to my own mind. And so they go with each other rather than being separate ways of understanding the mind. They're sort of traveling in parallel lines, that social world and mental world. So there are already some questions here, and please don't feel shy to ask any other questions. So to answer one of the questions, I'm not sure if this is the last Friday live stream. I think that it won't be, because it's only going to be one day that I overlap Lumpur Pasano and Ajahn Cunda before the next Friday, and so I don't think that. I think there might be some teaching I need to give around how to run all the equipment, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do that in one day before. So I'm hoping that I'm hoping they might agree to an interview that was really nice with the junior monks, and that if they won't, then maybe I'll interview the junior monks. No, they'll be gone at that point, so it'll have to be Lumpur and Ajahn Cunda if they'll agree to it. So we'll see. Stay tuned. Deal with Anicca. And we'll see. But that'll next week will definitely, if you see me next week, next Friday, that'll be the last time that I'm on the live stream, and I will be enjoying the presence of Lumpur Pasano. Definitely I'll also be present this coming Tuesday, and Lumpur will not have arrived by then. That's the 22nd, I believe. And so then we'll see. So anyway, some of the questions here. What to do when we're inclined to usually not talk because we have nothing to say, if we're more into listening mode, like always? Should we talk for the sake of feeding the relationship? I think with that question, there are times for listening and there's times for speaking. And if one really has a sense that there's nothing to say, I think that there's two things there. It might just be that if you tune into your heart, your sense of what's actually happening in a moment while you're either listening to someone else or being with somebody else, and there's nothing really to say, there's no aversion in your heart, then silence can be, as my grandmother used to say, silence can be golden. And it can be really beneficial when there's that metta involved with somebody else. You're caring for somebody else, or you're just around someone and you don't have to speak with them. You just but you can wish metta, and people can feel that, not necessarily that wishing metta, but that sense that you have of wanting the well-being for someone else. People can pick up on that, just how we walk into a room, or we interact with somebody, rather than you imagine like walking into a room with somebody and the thought is, can I get out of here as quickly as possible and not interact with them at all? So the two different ways of wishing someone well and caring for them versus the other is can be felt. So there's not always a need to have to speak, but we have to actually tune in to the other person as well and know when they are wanting to have an engagement with us. And sometimes we can't engage. Maybe we just know we'll be unskillful and it's not helpful to engage with them. And I think it's good to tell them that if one's close with that person. But yeah, we have to tune into the other, in a sense. Sometimes it's the right time to speak, and sometimes it's not. And the question, that last question, ended with feeding the relationship, and I think maybe the word helping is better, or encouraging. But I kind of understand what you mean. But to me, that feeding often has to do with sort of consuming, and metaphorically speaking, there's a sense that we want to be careful about how we are feeding on others. And so when I see that word in regards to other people, I do feel a caution around that, if that's a feeling one has, that because that's sometimes how we, in unskillful ways, interact with other people. We're feeding on them. We're seeking our own sort of validation, or our own sense of self and how we feel about ourselves, or whatever it might be. And that's we just need to be careful that that's not how we are sort of using other people or interacting with them. But in the sense of more like giving or helping or assisting, yes, sometimes that's how we think of our speech. Are there frustrations? Let's see. Are there frustrations related to the tradition's culture of a hierarchy when monks have interactions with lay people who don't know about or adhere to the same culture? I think when it comes to hierarchy and this sense that we have in our tradition of the sort of the more senior people having, I guess, gaining some more benefit, or as I was talking about, respect or things like that. Sure, there can be frustration, but I would say that frustration is a that would be a unwholesome state, or a reaction, a unskillful movement of mind, that kind of frustration, because again, it's placing how other people behave in terms of like what it might mean to me or for me. And I think what's important, how we reflect around that is like, is the Dhamma being upheld? Is the Dhamma being respected? Rather than am I being respected? Because people show respect in different ways. And so somebody might be very informal, but then you might have a feeling of like mutual respect and care, even with that attitude. So it's important for how we look in our interactions with others, and oftentimes, people are never wholly good or wholly bad, so we need to identify the good in another person and bring that out if we can when we're interacting with them. So getting too attached to a hierarchy, or how one is regarded by others, or should be, quote unquote, should be regarded by others, that's dukkha. That's a lot of dukkha. But if I have a sense when I'm speaking to somebody that the Dhamma is being disrespected, that there isn't a respect for um, the teachings, the Buddha, what it is that I represent, then yeah, there can be a caution I have with really continuing an interaction with somebody, or to kind of encourage that in somebody else by just making out like it's not a problem. But even when we're having just very informal speech, where it's not really about, it's not like I don't find it too helpful to always want to impart a level of restriction around only speaking about my path or the Buddhist teaching, or whenever I'm interacting with somebody. Sometimes there's just times where you're not exactly talking about that, but you're imbibing, you're bringing forth those teachings and how it is we talk, rather than what we talk about. So sometimes you just gotta talk about what paint you're gonna decide on, or just like how's everything going with your family or your friends or whatever it might be, or just the mundane aspects of life and how we speak about to other people. It's not always sutta after sutta or an explanation of this or that. So really it's I have more of a measure of how I relate to people, and the feeling I'm getting from how they're relating to me, in terms of what I'm seeing as skillful, rather than feeling frustrated with somebody who doesn't quite have the same relationship to how I relate to the Buddha Dhamma. I think it's very important to look at our expectations around that, and try to be clear with that. So another question is about my story, or why I became a monk. And now I think I've changed since ordaining. Those are often, those are questions that we sometimes hear in formal settings, or often when at a Baigir, when we have a tea time, the overnight guests there will ask questions about that. And there's I think my path was similar to anyone else. Just there's an identification of suffering and wanting to transcend that. Just not really being satisfied in what I was seeking as satisfying. I think there's been overall a sense of humility about how difficult the path can be, and how there is a sense of not wanting to give up despite that difficulty. Also as a reminder for myself to look at the positive things that I learn. So if I'm only focusing on the difficulty, the life can be quite dreary. So there's often a sense of, is there a little more peace, a little less dukkha in many of these areas of my life. So as I was talking about in the beginning of the talk here, I was speaking about receiving feedback, and I think that's easier for me now than it was before I became a monk. That's one thing that, and it's not always, especially if it's, I find, like most people, if it's in a large group, that's very difficult experience to go through, having several people give you feedback. But sometimes that can happen. That's happened occasionally in my monk's life in a larger group situation, and wow, there's a lot of self going on there, and just recognizing that it's not all of the suffering in that kind of situation is from my own myself. You know, it's like this sense of like I shouldn't be wrong in a group, all of these people. There's this there's the idea of like holding up my image of myself in everyone, and that's now everyone, not just one person, is thinks I'm this or that or whatever it might be. Luckily, that doesn't happen too often. But that's one thing is in terms of the mutual feedback with others. It's been really helpful to see, like, yeah, that welcoming of it, and also needing to be careful when there isn't that feeling within myself. I think the work with the meditation, the meditative life, gets easier as time goes on. But to quote Ajahn, I think he said something to me when I was complaining about something as an anagarika. He said, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's the first 20 years that are the hardest." And what? You must be joking. Not really, was his answer. So I think that's another aspect, is just learning that slow sense of, there's a humbleness or a humility that can be developed, because, like, well, there was expectations this would be a lot faster or a lot easier, and it's just not that way. So I think there's been a need to have patience, and as I've reflected on many times in this, in the live streams I give and the talks I give, we need to look at how we are sometimes unwilling to make mistakes, and so that's something that I've tried to work on. Is like, okay, it's all right to utterly fail or to have problems, and be okay with that, because if I'm not, then I'm not learning. I'm just hiding away from my own feelings that something is painful or difficult or wrong, and so it's been really important to examine that trait or that way of inclining, and to say, okay, if I have the attitude that I want to hide away or not hide away from the feeling of having failed or made a mistake, then I'm not really seeing that an understanding will actually of that, and allowing myself to feel the pain of that will move me through transcending it at the same time, and that it's very useful to do that, because as we do deal with adversity in our lives, we learn to be equanimous around it, so our minds don't move so much. They don't go up and down and out and about, and so that's very important learning. I try to engage in and reflect upon. I think taking responsibility has been very important. Take responsibility for my own stress or problems, and not seeing that they come from outside of myself, come from a particular attitude or way that I incline. Another lesson in my life is to see how desire can be quite destructive, and that's been a hard lesson, or that's been a painful lesson, and in that pain, it's been difficult, hard, not so pleasant. That when I do act out of wanting to get something my own way, or wanting to get something in my life that isn't, especially if it's something that's not wholesome, that desire can sometimes be harming others. You just look at like some little thing, you say something flippantly or without regard to another person, or like you just don't, you whatever. Like we were talking about the hierarchy. Maybe that can be used in terms of there has to be a measure of the fact that, like, the more senior I get, the more that can actually has an implication about how I behave around the people who I live with, and there is a power dynamic that can exist there, and so I've had to be very careful with that. So I think in general, just being aware of how desire and how much desire can really, if it's unwholesome, taint relationships and harm other people and harm trust in terms of just getting what we want for ourselves. It can be simple things or it can be more complex things in life. And for me, I've really seen that if I'm not careful, if I'm not seeing there's this sense of hiriotapa, this conscientiousness and concern about my actions, then with desire overriding the mind, then there's not really a concern for others, and how painful that can be when that occurs. Just a simple thing of like whatever it might be, having any of the four requisites that we have, a nicer kuti or better robes or particular food or whatever it might be, then it can, my trying to get what I want can be, it can harm the faith of those who follow. So that's been a difficult lesson, and it sometimes comes up more and less in my spiritual life and my life as a monk, and I've seen the destructive power of that. And so it's, I'm not meaning to dramatize it at all, but it's like a mind that is capable of desire without checks on that can move in with greater and greater negative implications. And so we need to look at just the little desires we have and how if they're unwholesome, how we need to take care of them, because the smaller ones can lead to larger ones, larger mistakes and problems that are harmful to others. And that, that does go into, I think, a sense of like, as I've spent more times in the rows, that there is a responsibility I have for how I care for the Buddha Dhamma, and how that really does affect people. That there is a power to teaching the Dhamma, and with great power comes great responsibility. To use a famous line from Spider-Man. There are lots of other lessons that I've learned, but I think I would go on for a long time. And there's a question here about wholesome desire, and I was not able to fulfill that. It also leads to suffering. Does that mean there should be no attachment to Cunda as well? The way Cunda is often translated is as a wholesome desire, or desire that's leading in the right, better, a direction that's not going to essentially causes problems. But I think, when we use the word attachment, I think if we're using it in the sense of how we cling to things and sort of refuse to let go of them, well, that attachment isn't great, but certain types of attachment are important. So the Ajahn Cunda would say that the Dhamma, the Vinaya is for holding on, the Dhamma is for letting go, I think is a pretty loose translation of that. So we do in certain ways cling to certain things, or we hold on, I don't want to say cling, to certain things that are useful and beneficial to us, and sometimes we hold them in ways that can be too rigid, so we have to be careful of that. But we still want to hold on to them. We want to pick them up. We want to use them, and I think that's very important in how we relate to certain things. So, for example, in what I was saying is, in just checking desire in general and unwholesome desires, we need to kind of hold on to that stuff. Okay, what am I Is there something I'm not seeing right now? Or just that sense of like, I might want something, but I need to remind myself that if I move towards that wanting without looking at the effects, the negative effects that can be had from that desire, if I'm ignoring that, then there's a lot of pain and suffering that can occur. So we remind ourselves of that. So we're sort of upholding and holding on to a sense of our own hiriyottapa, conscientiousness and concern, and our sense of, like, I've made this mistake in the past. I don't want to do this again in the future. I saw the repercussions. And why would I want to do that? Why would I want to create these problems for myself or other people? But ultimately, we do let go of everything. That's in the sense of nibbana. That's sort of the raft we take to the other shore. We let go of that raft. But I think people with that metaphor can sometimes sense that that's what I need to do with everything in my life currently. Well, as Ajahn Chah said, maybe that Buddha is not the same as this Buddha here. Or our sense of like being a Buddha right now is, well, for many of us, we're not. So we need to see, like, well, there are some things we need to kind of hold on to and keep close to us, and we have to learn that lesson of how tightly we're holding on. Like if we're being too rigid with certain things. And there's a question about coming back to teacher, understanding that I'm going, and how can I care about you and not suffer from attachment, feeling loss already? Well, there's two things. One is I hope I can come back here someday. But for now, I'm going. And I think I'm probably still going to teach. You can find me online, but also coming to visit Abhayagiri if I'm there. But also, I think that's an important question, just life question. How do we care about others and want them in our lives, but also not suffer from the attachment to them? And that's the big acknowledgement. I mean, there aren't too many religions that I know that get to the depth of life as much as Buddhism does, to my experience, and that's why. But I'm sort of possibly a bit biased with that. But all that is mine, beloved, and pleasing will become otherwise. Will become separated from me. This is the truth of life. All those things that we love in our life, our partners, our friends, our pets, family members, our homes, our all of our bodies, how we use our bodies, how they age. We're all being separated from those things in a continuous way, actually, because they're always changing. And so that's what we want to work with. That's what's important to work with. We suffer losses in our lives. We make huge mistakes. Our wonderful lives and people we're with, people can turn around and who we love and they hate us the next moment. And we might be responsible for that. And there's that reflection. It's not just even loss from death, or our lives going away. It's like somebody who you love could suffer from dementia and think that you're plotting a murder against them. Or whole personalities can change, or just, or we'll change. We lose our minds, we lose our bodies. So the Buddha did not focus on these things to be morbid and negative and bring up sadness and fear. It's more like, well, this is the reality of life. We need to really work with that. We really want to put an effort into understanding that as clearly as we can, and we want to do it now. We don't want to wait till the end of our lives because we don't know when that will be. And so in terms of really understanding the Dhamma, we want to be very clear with this aspect of the path. This is what dukkha is. It's separation. And as far as I can tell, one of the things that we have a lot of difficulty with that can be on the periphery is just the separation from this body, this healthy body, and losing health and slowly diminishing. And for those who are really practicing well in the right way and understanding the Dhamma, then this loss of the body becomes less suffering in our minds. It creates less suffering in our minds when we have to deal with it. So that sickness and the loss of our health and through aging, getting older, being unable to do things, we are able to let that go. And so that sense of dealing with separation from those we love is also part of that aspect of dealing with our own separation from that which most of us are very attached to, our bodies. So this is the path. This is what the Buddha was teaching, and this is why he taught, to identify our own stress and discontent, our suffering, our dissatisfaction, and to really see that we're creating that. And it doesn't mean we're not going to feel pain and sadness and, grief, but we're going to do something about it, or we should do something about it, because there is the possibility for transcendence. And that's what's probably one of the most important things in terms of my monastic life, is to try to encourage myself to keep looking very deeply at that, to keep looking very consistently and constantly at how I'm creating suffering and how I can transcend that, how I can uproot that, because it's not, there's nobody to blame really for my own suffering. It's just here. It's just in my heart, and how I'm perceiving and understanding the mind and behaving in certain ways. So that's what we're doing. It's a tough pill to swallow. It's not easy. This is the Buddha Dhamma. The Dhamma that he taught, the truth that the Buddha taught is, it's hard. It's hard to grasp, and it's hard to live by, and it's hard to live with. But it has the ultimate reward, and that is that we uproot suffering completely. There is no hatred. There is no greed. There's no more delusion in the mind of an enlightened being. And that's a treasure. That's an amazing thing in the world. The potential to uproot greed, hatred, and delusion, to end suffering completely. So if we hold that in our minds, and we hold it in our minds in a way that's skillful, then we have the potential to be released. And there are fruits along the way. It's not like it's just all unpleasant and all suffering until the last moment one realizes. Because as far as I know, as I've walked the path, there is less and less suffering that occurs, and that can occur. So there's a confidence and a faith that arises out of that, and that's what we want to use in our practice, while at the same time acknowledging that it's not easy, but we keep moving on. So I think I will end the live stream there today, and I hope that all of you have a good few days until I possibly see you next at the Tuesday, the first Tuesday, the first Tuesday, the Yoga Samadhi, weekly Tuesday event that we're having now. And then if you don't usually tune into that, then we'll see what happens next week on Friday. Next Friday, whether it's just me alone, or I'll have Lumpur Pasno and or Ajahn Cunda with me, or they'll be doing it, or one of them will be doing it without me. Anicca. So be well and keep up the hard work, and know that all of that difficult work does lead towards, can lead towards a fulfillment that is of the highest fulfillment, the highest happiness, and the highest peace.